Hello everyone, my name is Swanee. Thanks for stopping by and checking out my channel. Now yesterday we got a brand new update for Helldivers 2 with patch 1.000.200, and I gotta say right off the bat, this is one of my favorite updates so far that has come to the game. There are just so many good changes that they brought to this update. There's a couple bad that I'm not a big fan of, but for the most part, I'm really enjoying this update. The automatons are a lot easier to deal with now, and in my opinion, they're a lot more fun to fight. So hopefully after this update, we're going to see a lot more players start to face off against the automatons. So I tested all of the brand new changes that came in this update, and I'm going to give you guys my opinions and thoughts on these changes. And before we get into the specific changes that are mentioned in the patch notes, we actually got two new enemy types that were added that weren't listed in the patch notes. We got both the brand new automaton gunships and the giant factory striders, which is basically like a giant AT-AT from Star Wars. Now I played this update all day long. I played for hours, and I could not get these factory striders to spawn in. I saw that people were getting them all over Reddit, and people were talking about how hard they are to destroy, and apparently they can withstand like 500 kg bombs and stuff, but I could not get one to spawn. I played tons of different mission varieties. I played on the hardest difficulty. I couldn't get them to spawn no matter what I tried. So apparently they're in the game, but that's the only thing I wasn't able to test. Alright, so getting right into some of the changes. The arc thrower, it says that they fixed charging inconsistencies. It will now always take 1 second to charge a shot. They reduced the distance from 50 to 35 meters, and they increased the stagger force. Now, I am not an arc thrower main. I know some people just only play with the arc thrower, but in my testing, it still kind of feels the same to me. I still think it's really good against the Terminids. It's still a very good option, and I was still able to fire it a little bit early on the second follow-up shot. For the first shot, you do have to fully charge it. It takes about 1 second, but on the follow-up shots, I was still able to fire it pretty quickly without having to charge it up all the way. But I did notice that the stagger was pretty significant with the arc thrower, so I can't really tell too much of a difference with an arc thrower. And in my opinion, it's still really good. So on paper, it sounds like a nerf, but I couldn't notice too many changes. Next up is a big one, and it's the anti-material rifle damage is increased by 30%. And let me tell you, this is now one of the best go-to support weapons against the automatons. It will just wreck everything. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's kind of good against the Terminids too. It's just, you know, you get easily swarmed against the Terminids, so this has always been a better weapon to choose against the automatons. It can two-shot kill those scout riders, so those little like mini ATRTs, it will take them out with ease. Any of the medium enemy types like the Berserkers or the Devastators, if you shoot them in the like mid region or just shoot them in the crotch, it will one-shot kill them now, which is huge. And obviously any of the smaller enemy types, it will also one-shot kill them as well. It does a ton of damage against the Hulks, so if you shoot it in the little eye or if you shoot it in the back, it will just do a ton of damage to them. And overall, this feels like a pretty drastic change for the anti-material rifle, and this has my seal of approval. It is really good now. So next up is the Breaker Incendiary. Damage per bullet is increased from 15 per bullet to 20 per bullet, and the overall fire damage per tick is increased by 50% from all sources. And let me tell you, the Breaker Incendiary shotgun is now god tier against the Terminids. It will just melt through entire hordes of the smaller enemy types. It is so easy to get swarmed when they send just tons of warriors and hunters and stalkers, and the little tiny scavengers, it's just so easy to get overwhelmed, but the Breaker Incendiary will now just melt through them like butter. It is so good. I cannot talk this thing up enough. This is my go-to weapon now for the Terminids. It's a night and day difference. Like, it is crazy. And because of this 50% increase from all sources, it also made the flamethrower god tier as well against the Terminids. Like, the flamethrower is probably one of the best support weapons. It will just melt through everything. Same thing goes for the Incendiary Grenades. Those are also a very good option now as well, where before I just couldn't justify choosing them over any of the other regular grenades. So I highly recommend using fire damage now against the Terminids. It is amazing. But do be warned that the fire damage is going to hurt you more as well now too. When going up against the automatons, the big hulks that have the flamethrowers, they will insta-kill you if you even semi get touched by their flamethrower. Before, it kind of gave you enough time to dive and put out the fire. Now if you get caught on fire, you just instantly die and you can't dive to put out the fire. You're just dead. So definitely be careful of those guys now because they're even more dangerous. Next up, there are some ballistic shield changes. The collision mesh has been slightly increased in size for more forgiveness. They changed shield poses so that less of the Helldiver is exposed, and they addressed a bug where part of the Helldiver would become vulnerable when using the shield in first person. And these changes are amazing. Before, I would never use the ballistic shield. I tried it, I tested it, I gave it multiple chances, and it was never good enough to justify using against the automatons. Now this shield is almost a must-have for the automatons. It is so good. I was able to stand directly in front of a tank and just take all of the hits directly, and I was completely fine. The only way the tank was able to kill me was when I climbed up on top of it and was standing point blank in its barrel, and it finally killed me that way. But I was standing in front of large groups of enemies all shooting at me, and I didn't take any damage at all. So the ballistic shield paired with an SMG is a really good option now against the automatons, where before I wouldn't recommend using the ballistic shield almost at all. So this is a really good change. Next up is the Jar 5 Dominator. They increased the damage from 200 to 300, and they increased the stagger effect, so now you can more easily stagger enemies. And this buff is crazy for the Dominator. I was just absolutely melting through medium tier enemy types against the Terminids. Now I don't recommend this against the Terminids just because it shoots one shot at a time, and it's very easy to get swarmed against the Terminids. This isn't the go-to option, but if you are going to bring it against the Terminids, it is doing an insane amount of damage to weak spots on like Chargers and Bile Titans, and it will just absolutely wreck any of the medium tier enemies that have armor. And then switching over to the automaton side of things, it is now one of the best weapons for the automatons. If you treat this weapon as sort of like a DMR and you pick the enemies off at a distance, it is amazing. A lot of people in the community before this update were complaining that this weapon was very underpowered and it wasn't worth using, and the devs apparently took that to heart, and now it is one of the best weapons to use against the automatons. I mean, that damage increase from 200 to 300, that is a pretty massive damage increase, and you can definitely tell the difference. So next up is the Diligence Counter Sniper. They increased armor penetration from light to medium. That's the only change that was brought to the Diligence Counter Sniper, and it makes a little bit of a difference. It is going to hit a little bit harder for those medium tier enemies for both the Terminids and the automatons. I don't recommend it against the Terminids though, because it only has a magazine size of 15 rounds, so you are going to be burning through your ammo pretty quickly with this weapon. This weapon is a lot better against the automatons. It will one-shot kill any of the smaller enemy types, and it does a pretty good job of taking out the medium tier enemies as well, as long as you hit their weak spots. It wasn't too much of a change, but it does make a little bit of a difference, and now I can see myself actually choosing this weapon, where before this wasn't one that I would ever use. So this is definitely a great change to see. Next up, I want to talk about the Liberator Penetrator. It now has a full auto mode. This doesn't really change the weapon too much, it just gives you an additional firing mode, and that's always a good thing to see. Do be warned though, if you're going to use this in full auto, you're going to be reloading your weapon constantly, so I would only maybe use full auto if you're getting swarmed when something's right up in your face and you kind of have to like panic fire. But I often found myself still bursting it when I had it in full auto mode just to kind of save ammunition. So this doesn't really change the weapon too much. I wouldn't really call this much of a buff, but it does give you additional options, and that's always good to see. So I think any fans of the Liberator Penetrator are going to like this change. So next up, I gotta talk about the Slugger. The Slugger got some pretty big nerfs, and they're definitely noticeable, and a lot of the members of the community are already upset about this on Reddit. Before this update, the Slugger was one of my go-to weapons for the automatons, and now I don't really see a good reason to use it compared to like the Jar 5 Dominator. It's just kind of sucks in every way in comparison. But for the Slugger, they reduced the stagger, so now enemies aren't going to be knocked back as much. So if you have a Berserker or a Rocket Devastator getting ready to shoot the rockets at you, or you have a Berserker up in your face, you aren't going to be able to knock them back as much. Same goes for the Terminids. When you have the Warriors or the Stalkers or the Brood Commanders all getting up in your face charging at you, you can't knock them back as much, which leads to you very easily getting overwhelmed. But that's not all. They reduced the damage from 200 280 to 250, and you can definitely tell a difference against those medium tier enemies. It takes a couple more shots to kill them now, which definitely sucks. And then they reduced the demolition force, so now you can no longer shoot open the containers. Before with the Slugger, I would run around the map and find these shipping containers, and you could just shoot the door open, and you didn't have to waste a grenade, and it was great. And now after this update, you can no longer shoot open the containers, and you know, that definitely sucks. And then they fixed the armor penetration tag in the menu now, so now instead of doing light armor penetration, it says that it does medium armor penetration. But overall, the Slugger definitely got a big nerf. I can tell a big difference from what it was prior to this update, and a lot of the community can as well. I don't think this nerf was justified. It was a pretty good weapon, but it wasn't so good that it needed this drastic of a nerf, I don't think. So if you're a fan of a Slugger, you aren't going to like this change. So next up is one of my favorite changes that came with this update. This is a update to the Helldivers themselves. They said balancing adjustments have been made to heavy and medium armor, and you now take about 10% less damage than before while wearing heavy armor, and take 5% less when wearing medium armor. Fortified commando and light armor is unchanged. And it might not sound like much on paper, but I could tell a big difference. Heavy armor now feels like heavy armor. I can now withstand rockets to the face. Before this update, my most hated enemy was the Rocket Devastator, and now they're not as big of a problem. I can get hit in the face with a rocket and survive if I'm wearing medium or heavy armor. It's great. I don't have to worry about insta-dying anymore. It's wonderful. Don't get me wrong, there's still things that can one-shot kill you. It just doesn't seem like it happens all the time. And now I can finally use the heavy armor. Before this update, I never wore the heavy armor. And I don't think many members of the community did either. There was just no reason to ever use it. It makes you slow and clunky, and you just get swarmed very easily. So now you can take a little bit more damage, and you can tell a big difference. So this is a great change, and I'm sure you guys are going to love it. They also made a change to the Bile Titan. It can no longer be stunned by the stun grenades, so that definitely sucks. I would always throw the stun grenade and then drop some sort of airstrike on it, and now the Bile Titan just does not care. You could throw all your stun grenades at it, it does not matter. It will just puke on you or step on you. So that definitely sucks. That is a bit of a nerf to the stun grenades. Then they slightly nerfed the Bile Spewer and the Nursing Spewers. They do less damage with their puke now, so now if you dive out of the way as you're getting puked on, it won't insta-kill you. Now if you stand directly still and it hits you with a full blast, you're still probably going to die from it, but you can tell a bit of a difference. It's not nearly as lethal. So that is also a good change. They also made some changes to the mech suit. Charger's normal melee attack now does less damage against the exosuits, so you're not going to get one-shotted by chargers anymore, so that's great. But then they also nerfed the rockets. The rockets will now penetrate armor only on direct hits, and you can tell a big difference with this change. Before, you could sort of shoot a rocket into a group of enemies and it would do armor penetrating on all of them. Now it's only going to penetrate if you hit them directly, and that is a big nerf when it comes to taking out large crowds with the rockets. I think they only want you to use the rockets against the big stuff, and they want you to use the machine guns against the smaller stuff. So the exosuit can take a little bit more damage now, but the rockets aren't nearly as good, and you'll find that enemies are going to be targeting the mech suit a little bit more aggressively now. Before, if you had an exosuit, the enemies would just target your teammates if they were on foot, and they kind of ignored you, and now they will actually target you and focus on you if you're in a mech suit. Like, think of them thinking as you as a higher priority target. So the mech definitely got a nerf in this update. Another cool thing that they changed in this update that wasn't in the patch notes is now that anytime you're typing in game, like if you type in the in-game chat, your character will actually type on their arm now. So that's pretty immersive and pretty cool to see. They also added sandstorms and blizzards. Now there currently are no maps active in the game as of recording this video that have blizzards on them, but I was able to get some gameplay of a sandstorm and you can't see anything. Like during a sandstorm, it is scary. Especially if the enemies are locked onto you and they're shooting at you through the sandstorm, you basically have to blind fire or just hide behind a rock and pray, because it is nuts. It's honestly probably the most realistic sandstorm I've ever seen in a video game. It looks so cool, but I mean, that's a good like minute or two that you're not going to be able to fight. So you definitely need to be careful when you're caught in the sandstorms. But the sandstorms are definitely a pretty cool new feature. And then lastly, I want to talk about the new gunships that were added. They added these new factories for the automatons, and they will keep producing gunships until you take out these factories. Kind of similar to how the shriekers work for the terminids, where you have to take out their nest and then they stop spawning. these gunships will keep coming out until you take out their factories. The only difference is you can't take out the factories from a distance. I wasn't able to find any weak spots on these factories. The only way we found to blow up the factories is if you hit them with a 500 kg bomb or go up and place a hell bomb underneath of them and detonate them manually. And these gunships are scary. I was able to take a couple of their rockets while wearing heavy armor and it didn't immediately kill me. But if you're not wearing heavy armor, or if there's multiple gunships targeting you at the same time, they are going to just wreck your face. So a good way to take out these gunships are any of the anti-tank rifles, like the expendable anti-tank, the recoilless rifle, and now the Spear actually has some good uses now. Before today's update, no one ever picked the Spear. The Spear just has a really awful lock-on time, and it was very inconsistent. Now we were actually able to test it and get a number of different kills against these gunships. So I actually recommend using the Spear now and giving it a shot. I will say though that they need to add some anti-air stratagems now to kind of equal the playing field. I know in the leaks they were working on some anti-air stratagems, but we need either another anti-air rocket launcher or an anti-air airstrike or something, because these gunships can very easily overwhelm you and just completely wipe you out. I'll also mention that the Quasar cannon can make quick work of these guys as well. To take them out in just one shot, make sure you aim for their thrusters. If you hit them in the base of the body, it's going to take multiple shots to kill them. Just aim for the thrusters and you'll take them out in one shot. And while I'm talking about the Quasar cannon, they made a slight change to it that didn't make it into the patch notes. They added a little charge up meter to it so you can now see when it's charging up and when it's overheated. They also made this same change to the railgun that wasn't in the patch notes. Now when you zoom in first person on the railgun, there's an additional little overheat meter at the end of the scope. That way it's a lot easier to use when it's in unsafe mode and you don't have to worry about accidentally blowing yourself up. So overall, this is a really good update and they made a lot of great changes. The only thing that I didn't like about this update is that change that they made to the Slugger. You know, they nerfed the Slugger, but they made so many other things just amazing now that I kind of give them a pass for the Slugger. I can put the Slugger on the shelf and try out all these other weapons and have a good time. So instead of using the Slugger, I'll probably just use the Dominator now. But if I had to rate this update out of 10, I'd probably give it a 9 or a 10 out of 10. I really love this update. Like I said earlier, the only thing I couldn't test was those factory striders. Hopefully they increase the spawn rate so that we see them a little more often. I was expecting them to spawn in pretty similar to the Bile Titans, where you would see them all over the place and they would kind of be like the big boss. But unfortunately, that just doesn't seem to be the case. So that is going to do it for everything in this latest update. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section down below. If there's any secret changes that happen in the patch, then let me know down in the comments. It's just me and my friend Cookie versus the entirety of the internet, so odds are we probably missed something. So let me know down in the comments and I'll give it a heart so everyone else can see it as well. If you're new here, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications. That way you don't miss out on any future Helldivers 2 videos. And I will talk to you guys next time.